Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolutely gripping 1972 Rawalpindi prisoner of war escape. But look, we aren't just going to treat this as some Hollywood thriller about a prison break. Instead, we're going to break this down from the rigorous perspective of a military history researcher. We're going to map out exactly how three captured Indian fighter pilots engineered a truly daring escape from a highly secured Pakistani facility and how they turned systemic weaknesses into a literal masterclass of tactical execution.
Here is our operational flight path for today. 1. Context of the capture. 2. Engineering the escape. 3. The Self-4 breakout. 4. Intercepted at Torkham. And finally, 5. The missing 54 legacy. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, the context of the capture and the broader strategic landscape. To really understand the geopolitical realities framing pilot Dilit Parlukar's capture and his eventual diplomatic limbo, we've got to look at the timeline. So on December 3, 1971, the war officially begins, with airstrikes across multiple airfields. Just a week later, on December 10th, Parlukar's aircraft takes a hit over Pakistani territory after a successful radar station bombing mission. He's forced to eject, landing right in hostile territory. The war officially wraps up on December 16th with a massive surrender, and by July 1972, the Simla Agreement is signed. But, as any military historian will tell you, what gets signed in ink on paper often translates to agonizing, drawn-out delays on the ground. Following his capture, Parulkar is hauled off to a POW camp in Rawalpindi. Naturally, during his interrogation, the authorities demand the layout of India's highly strategic Udhampur airbase so they can use it for counterbombing. And this brilliantly illustrates Parulkar's immediate use of strategic countermeasures. Instead of yielding or just flatly refusing and inviting brutal torture, he plays an incredibly smart game of tactical deception. He draws them a highly detailed but completely fabricated sketch. The map he hands over? It wasn't Udhampur at all. It was actually the layout of Mumbai's Santa Cruz airport. This false intel bought him crucial time. Now take a look at this number, 93,000. It's a staggering figure, representing the documented Pakistani soldiers who surrendered to the Indian army by mid-December. This completely flipped the diplomat leverage. Pakistan held roughly 500 captured Indian POWs. While a diplomatic exchange was pretty much inevitable, the sheer logistical and political nightmare of processing nearly 100,000 troops meant that these captured pilots could be waiting months, if not years, to go home. Purtavo recognized this diplomatic inertia right away. He knew he couldn't just sit around and wait for the politicians to sort it out. Moving on to part 2, engineering the escape and exploiting systemic vulnerabilities. The planning here was absolutely methodical. First, they specifically targeted cell number 4 because it was the largest, had the fewest patrols, and sat closest to the outer perimeter. But you might be wondering, how exactly do you dig through a brick wall without any tools? Well, this is where they transformed mundane everyday items into a calculated engineering methodology. Step 1. They deliberately grew out their beards so they could formally request scissors from the guards for grooming. Step 2. They started swiping spoons and forks from their meals, combining them with those scissors to chip away at the decaying brick wall night after night. Step 3. To hide the debris, they ingeniously used cardboard boxes from supply couriers, hiding the dirt at the bottom and topping it off with trash. And finally, step 4. They meticulously reset the loose bricks before dawn so that the morning guard inspections found absolutely nothing out of place. It's a literal masterclass in improvisation. But hey, breaking out of the cell is only half the battle, right? Surviving the evasion route requires serious logistics. And this is where their knowledge of international law became a massive tactical asset. Under the Third Geneva Convention, captured military personnel are actually entitled to a specific monetary allowance. They brilliantly exploited this convention. Instead of spending their allowance on little luxuries, they pooled their cash to stockpile high-calorie, non-perishable rations from the camp canteen. We're talking dry fruits and condensed milk, exactly what they'd need to sustain themselves on the harsh journey ahead. So they have supplies, but acquiring an evasion route required some brilliant psychological manipulation. Fleeing straight toward the Indian border meant crossing heavily militarized checkpoints and rivers. Parlukar figured that fleeing towards Afghanistan was statistically a much safer bet, but they lacked a map. So, what does Parlukar do? He strikes up a friendly conversation with the camp commandant, Usman Hamid, about Hamid's foreign travels. Parlikar casually mentions that he'd love to attend the 1972 Munich Olympics after he's eventually released, and asks Hamid to help him map out a hypothetical overland route. Hamid happily obliged, completely unknowingly handing over a map that provided the exact geographic intelligence the pilots needed to navigate to the Afghan border. Just incredible.
All right, part 3, the Cell 4 breakout, execution and diversion.
The timing of this operation was no accident. They specifically chose the night of August 13th because a heavy incoming storm would mask the noise, and a huge chunk of the guards were already on leave for Pakistan's Independence Day on the 14th. Once Parlikar, MS Gruel, and Harish Singh slipped through the breached wall, they immediately deployed a counterintelligence tactic. They deliberately tossed a fake map on the ground that pointed toward the Uri-Poonch route, the exact opposite direction of their actual Afghan trajectory. On top of that, a fourth pilot, V.S. Chut, intentionally stayed behind. He arranged pillows and blankets on the empty beds to mimic sleeping bodies. These layered tactical diversions worked perfectly. They ensured the guards were severely delayed in even realizing there was a breach until well into the next morning.
Now, traversing enemy territory obviously required rock-solid aliases. Dilip Parlikar became Philip Peter. MS Gruwal became Ali Amir, and Harish Singh became John Jacob. Dressed in locally tailored Patani suits, which they had smartly convinced the camp tailor to sew for them under the guise of wanting casual wear, they adopted these forged identities. It allowed them to seamlessly blend right into the local civilian populace as they navigated public bus stations all the way toward Peshawar. Which brings us to part 4, intercepted at Torkham, the unforeseen variable. And here is the fatal flaw of the entire operation. After successfully making it to the Khyber Pass area, literally just miles from the Afghan border, the pilots start searching for the Landikana railway station to complete their final leg. But there's a huge problem. They were operating on outdated intelligence. They were entirely unaware that the Landikana station had actually been decommissioned and closed down by the British way back in 1932. This gap in intel forced a major pivot. They had to hire a local taxi. And it was right there in this taxi, near the Torkham border, that their broken, unfamiliar Urdu raised immediate red flags. A local confronted them, a crowd quickly gathered, and the police showed up. Completely cornered, Parlikar deployed a desperate, quick-thinking bluff. He shouted, "I am an airman from Lahore. I shed my blood for this country, and this is how you treat me." It was a massive gamble, but you know what? It worked just long enough. It bought them the crucial time they needed to demand the local police call the camp commandant, Usman Hamid. By verifying their status as high-value POWs, Parlikar effectively stopped the local police from executing them on the spot as unaccounted-for spies. They were ultimately recaptured, yes, but they survived. Finally, we reach part 5, the missing 54 legacy. A sobering historical thesis. So you have to ask yourself, why take this kind of extreme risk in the first place? Well, the true motivation boils down to one staggering number: 54. This represents the missing in action Indian POWs from the 1971 war who, according to documented records, simply never returned home. Even though the official exchange did eventually bring Parlikar, Gruwal, and Singh back to India in December 1972, the chilling fate of the missing 54 proved that having blind faith in the diplomatic system was incredibly dangerous. And the evidence of this systemic failure is incredibly well documented. For instance, there was a Time magazine photograph clearly showing Major A.K. Ghosh in captivity, yet he was never returned. In 1989, decades after the war ended, there was a direct eyewitness sighting of Flight Lieutenant V.V. Tambe by his own uncle in a Faisalabad jail. And right up to 2017 and 2019, official parliamentary and military statements have openly acknowledged that these 54 defense personnel remain missing, with really strong indicators that they languished in foreign custody long after peace was declared. Impartial historical data points confirm that the official repatriation process was inherently flawed. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider the reality of the situation these three pilots faced. Knowing the grim fate of the missing 54, we leave you with this final thought. Was the extreme risk of digging through a wall with a stolen spoon and navigating hostile territory just a reckless gamble? Or, from a purely tactical standpoint, was it the only logical decision to guarantee they wouldn't just become another lost number in a failing diplomatic system? Parlucker actually stated years before the war that if he was ever captured, he would engineer his own destiny. And guys, that is exactly what he did. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning those historical narratives, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.